Hello, welcome to the Flute 360 podcast, where we incorporate a panoramic view of flute-related topics. I am your host, Heidi K. Begay, and this is episode 123, Tech Equipment Setup for Flute Recordings, Part 2. The Flute 360 podcast and JK Media Productions are teaming up to help you with your student and professional needs. I, Heidi, offer consultation work to both music students and professionals alike. If you are a student who needs help studying for graduate pre- and post-music exams, editing a research paper, interested in flute lessons, or needs help with job applications, I am here for you. Also, I have been currently working with ministries, music publication companies, and other music professionals to help them with their online projects. Whether you need creative or social media help, I would be thrilled to work with you. My husband, Eric, has been an audio and video engineer for over 10 years and owns the JK Media Productions company. If you are someone who takes or gives music lessons via the web and need help with equipment and or setup, feel free to reach out to Eric. Lastly, he is well skilled with audio and video edits for your next creative project. Please contact us today at HeidiKBegay.com and jkproductions.media so we can get started working towards your professional goals. We look forward to hearing from you soon. Hey guys, welcome back to another Flute 360 podcast episode. Thank you for tuning in, and whether you are a new listener or have been an avid listener, thank you so much for your support. If you are not following the Flute 360 podcast through LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, go over there and follow me because I always post new updates about the platform on a daily/weekly basis. And I don't want you to miss out on those updates. Also, I have a new Flute 360 podcast newsletter. This is something brand new, and I'm so excited to dive in to this realm. So if you're interested in getting podcast updates, teacher performing tips, and some perks along the way, go ahead to my website, HeidiKBegay.com, and a pop-up will appear, and you can type in your information, and I will make sure to get out that newsletter to you right away. Hi, Eric.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
My belly's full and I'm sleepy.
Well, hopefully you're not too sleepy for this beautiful episode 123.
Excited to be here.
I've been dying to say this is episode 123 for the last month. I'm a dork. What can I say? Do you want to tell the listeners why your belly is all full?
Because we had a big salad around noon.
Yeah.
But then Heidi was still hungry.
Yeah.
So we went out and got some more food.
Yeah.
And I tried to keep up with you.
Yeah.
Which is impossible to do.
My metabolism is it's insane. I mean, I'm blessed. I like it, but it's, 2 lunches. It's a problem. So speaking of episode 123, I've had you for the entire month of August in series 26, which is navigating your virtual flute world.
Yes.
And thank you so much for being a willing participant. Although I don't know how much of a willing, I kind of dragged you and said, hey, guess what? This is something that the listeners are dying to know about, and let's feed them the answers because, I mean, it's a hot topic right now. I mean, our world has gone remote in more ways than one. And so if we can give you any tips and advice to help you navigate, whether it's your remote music lessons or your recording sessions, and we are so glad that we get to offer you this information.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so without further ado, let's talk about today's topic, and that is how to set up the tech equipment for your flute recording. But before we get into the microphone and the microphone stand setups, let's talk about the recording space.
Okay. So your recording space is going to be very important because it contributes to how your tone is. And if you have access to a hall or a church, that would be a great scenario because this will let your instrument resonate, which sounds very pleasing to your ears, giving you those natural reverb sounds.
Okay, cool. So the natural flute sound of the resonance and the projection will be captured beautifully into the microphone because of the hall space.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, cool. So for most of you out there who are wondering, most churches offer their sanctuary space for free if you are a member. If not, sometimes they have a small fee associated with the booking. I know we paid about $100 for our sanctuary space like 5 years ago when I was doing audition tapes for my DMA program. But $100, come on. If it means that you're going to be left with a great product for something as important as a graduate entrance audition tape or for your undergraduate career, why not?
Exactly.
Okay, so if for some reason a school hall or a church's sanctuary is not available to you, what else can I do?
Well, you can experiment with recording at home, which is something that I highly recommend, which is a place where you probably feel most comfortable playing your instrument. And at the exact same time, you have the freedom to record. So you have unlimited time, in other words, to learn how to record.
No, I really appreciate that because as a performer, that is something that I need. I mean, you just said the magic word, comfort.
Yes.
Playing in front of a microphone, in a limited amount of time, like when I booked that sanctuary 5 years ago, where has time gone? I don't even know what year it is anymore. But when I booked it or for any other recording projects that I did throughout my career, it's a real thing. It's like you have that hall for 2 hours, that's it.
Yes.
And so if you don't want that kind of pressure and it's not necessary, record at home. But I love your other keyword, experiment.
Yes, exactly. And I think that when you are a musician and you're getting into the recording world, that's, I stressed it maybe 3 or 4 episodes back as well, saying that if you experiment with your equipment, you understand the nuances of how the microphone works, how your recording software works. It just opens up a whole world of ideas once you get to know how these pieces of equipment work. And that way you're able to record yourself even better.
And you know the nuances of that particular room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So in one case, there was a time when we had to record you in our apartment in Keller. And we had to set up a microphone in the living room and just make do with what we could do in the moment because there was a time crunch on this recording. And it came out just fine. We just had to make sure that we unplugged a few things, like the refrigerator. We heard that buzzing sound in the refrigerator. We unplugged that. We made sure to cool down the room a whole lot. So we had the air conditioner blasting for a while. And then when it got to a comfortable temperature, we shut it off. So we had a comfortable setting for you to record. And once we were done, we were able to listen back and see what was usable.
Yeah. No, and it turned out well. I got accepted at an international competition, and we learned a lot from that process. And I didn't rent out a fancy hall. Like you said, it was just our living room, and it worked.
Yeah, it worked. And the thing about was how we set up in this particular way was we used the biggest space in our apartment. And I don't think there was very much natural reverbs, which wasn't important at the time because it was a competition. And I think they were just looking for your technique and how musical you were, which does translate in recording. And this is just one particular scenario where we just happened to do it in our apartment. Now, if you have the ability to record in a hall, in an auditorium of some sorts, and that just gives you a much better sounding recording as well. But I think what most people are looking for in a competition is your musicality and your technical ability. And when recorded properly, all that will be translated in a recording.
Nice. So what you're saying is, yes, you want to do well on the technical side of things. And yes, you want to consider the space. And yes, consider the equipment. But at the end of the day, your musicality, who you are as a player, and your technique and all your hard hours, it will come through. Whether it's $100 recording in the sense of like a Zoom microphone or $1,000 ribbon microphone.
Yep.
Your work is going to be stated and it's going to be clearly heard.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Exactly.
Yeah, very cool. Some really good tips to keep in mind. So the space is crucial. If you cannot do the hall, do your apartment. And, feel free to experiment maybe with your kitchen if it's big enough, because think about carpet. Think about the hard floors, carpet in a living room and a bedroom versus the hard floors in a kitchen or a bathroom. Now, those spaces might be smaller, and that's something, again, that you have to consider. But how crazy would it be to record in the kitchen?
I think that would be totally fine as long as you're listening back to your recording.
Okay.
And you are getting all the characteristics that you want from your instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Does it sound too tinny? Does it sound too bright?
Mm.
Should I move to a different part of the room? And that's the whole thing with experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is, there's a right way to experiment and a wrong way to experiment, though, in my years of practice.
Mm. So what do you mean there's a right way and a wrong way?
I think sometimes there could be when you're standing way too close to the mic. Let's say you have your instrument and you are within a foot of the pickup of the microphone.
Well, that's ridiculous.
I think that would just be, you'd be distorting the mic at that point. The
Right.
sound pressure levels would be way too high at that point. Although microphones are able to withstand that much sound pressure level, but it would just sound unnatural to be standing that close.
Okay, so that's a beautiful segue. Whether you are recording with the Zoom microphone picks that we offered last week or the Audio-Technica Rode, it doesn't matter. We are going to talk about now the microphone placement to yourself, the flutist, and the actual microphone and microphone stand. So take that away, Eric.
Okay, so in my experience in recording flute, I've always had the best results when I had a flutist was standing about 5 to 6 feet away from the microphone. That would be directly in front of them. And the microphone would be sitting about 2 to about 3 feet above their head.
Okay.
And so that height there gives you the room
Okay.
and the flute.
Okay.
So it'll pick up the natural reverbs of the room, the natural ambience of the room. And then where I would position that particular microphone is about where your keys would be on the body of the flute.
Okay.
Now, depending on the nuances you want to capture of the flute, you might want to turn yourself diagonal toward or away from the microphone.
Well, we already hold the instrument like to a 45-degree angle.
Mm-hmm.
So naturally, we already have our right foot back, left foot's in front of us,
Mm-hmm.
and we're bringing the flute about 45 degrees.
Yeah. So in this distance and height of the microphone, and this is totally experimental. This could give you a different type of tone, but in this particular angle of the microphone, you probably don't want to stand too parallel to the mic. You might want to keep your natural holding position of the flute, but maybe angle yourself a little bit more away from the microphone. This will help with maybe reducing the brightness or the key clicks of the flute.
Okay, so you're having the microphone placed in the middle of my body, in the middle of the flute, as opposed to the head joint, and why is that?
I think that when a flutist is blowing into the sound hole of the flute, I believe that you can capture a lot of the wispiness in that area right there. So the more you go out toward the body, the more you're actually hearing the whole tone of the flute.
Nice.
And not so much of the brightness.
Okay.
Giving you a much warmer type of tone.
Mid-range.
Yes.
Okay. And then you would never want to, well, never say never, but I have never seen you in 15 years do this. You would never want to place the microphone at the foot joint.
Oh, no. I
mean, with the same distance and everything that you said, you would never want to position it near the foot joint.
I think that particular setting would be more for a different type of recording. I think that would be for like a jazzy type of flute, maybe a flute in the setting with like a jazz combo.
Huh.
But we're talking about recording solo flute, a classical flute, the classical flute tone.
Okay. All those Bach partitas.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. No, that's really great. So it was really cool to see Eric throughout these years, really hone his craft because it synced up with a lot of principles that my teacher, Brian Luce, gave to me when I was a freshman in college. I remember him talking about the height, and he would say, raise your hand. That's how high the microphone should be. And then when I saw Eric doing it, I was like, oh, yeah, that's about the 2 to 3 feet above the head.
Yes.
Yeah. And then he'd always get his flute, it's all put together, and he'd put it out like a sword.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, and then a little bit extra past the head joint. That's where the microphone stands in relationship to you distance-wise.
Yes. And a lot of this will happen depending on the room as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it just depends on the further you'll get back from the microphone, the further you get away from the actual diaphragm of the microphone, the more room you will capture.
Okay.
But the closer you start to get to that microphone, the more focused your sound will be, the more you'll capture more flute mixed in with the room.
Okay. So you want a healthy balance.
Yes.
You don't want it too far away because then you're going to sound like Grand Canyon, right?
Possibly, yeah, if it was that big. Yeah.
Well, the reverb would be nice for us flutists because then we would be so into our sound if it was reverbing like that. But you don't want to sound like a little mouse.
No.
And then you don't want it too close because then you're going to hear every nuance, and that's going to be almost ridiculous.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is just recording yourself and listening back. And my ear particularly always wants to hear some sort of ambience, some sort of room in that. It's pleasing to the ear.
Okay, so to summarize, we want it to be about 5 to 6 feet in front of us, 2 to 3 feet above us, and in the middle of the flute where the keys are.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So now that we've summarized that, let's talk about your video submission. If you are recording for Team EA, I know they are accepting video recordings this year because of COVID. So let's talk about the setup now, Eric, for the Shure MV88 or your camcorder with the external microphone.
Yes. Now, just depending on how you set this up too, you're probably going to want to have, and in case of the Shure microphone, that's going to be plugged right into your iOS device or your Android device. You're probably going to want this on a stand, sitting probably more at the height of your face. And probably I would say this exact same thing, as long as you can see yourself in the frame, seeing your whole upper half, giving you a little bit of space on the top of your head and your whole flute in the frame of the video. That'll probably be the most important position. That way they can see you from the top half. And also this microphone is set in a position where it is able to capture your flute as well. And I would keep in mind the same type of practice. You don't want to be too close to that microphone where you might distort the microphone or it just sounds unnatural standing that close to the microphone.
Okay. So same tips from the Zoom and the Audio Technica that we just gave.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But you just have to think of the visual representation now, or the visual side of this, because that does play a part in the judges' critiques.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a bit more delicate just because the microphone is actually attached to the video camera too as well in this particular way too. So you kind of have to have a little bit of give and take in this particular scenario.
No, that's a good point to make, that they're together, they're combined.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So if you're not going the Shure MV88 route with your smartphone and you do have a Sony or a Canon camcorder and you are using, remember from last week, please, whatever you do, use an external microphone. Do not use the camcorder's internal microphone. What would that setup look like, Eric?
Same scenario, you'd want to use the exact same steps that we talked about at the very beginning of having your microphone at a distance in front of you of at least 6 feet to 2 to 3 feet above your head. And then your video camera, same practice, make sure your whole torso and giving the top of your head a little bit of space in the frame of the video, and your whole flute should be in the frame.
Now, if you do, like, think about Greece, when we rented out that space, correct, at the center, the art center, we recorded, like, from my feet up. And that's because we had the space of a hall where there was this beautiful stage.
Yes.
So again, if you're recording in the bedroom, then the torso up and some height is applicable. But I think if you're in a concert hall, you might have some room to play with there and incorporating the whole body.
Yes, exactly. And I think I was talking about having a limited amount of space and
Yeah.
just being conscientious of like, okay, you don't want to have just your face and part of the flute in the frame.
True.
But you want to maybe back it up a little bit, especially if you don't have a zoom lens or a wide angle lens. You probably want to back up enough to get your torso and your whole flute and a little bit of space above your head in the frame of the video.
Okay, cool, Eric. Thanks for those tips. So anything else that you would like to offer fellow flutists, whether they are a teacher or a student, for their next recording project?
Okay, I cannot stress this enough, but I would make sure to give yourself 1 to 2 weeks of practice with this. Experiment with your tools before you actually do the real thing. Do a test recording, listen back, do it again, listen back, try something different if you're not getting the results that you want.
And we've mentioned this before, that literally this whole recording process and everything we're talking about, just like the art of practicing, there's an art of performing and there's an art of recording. So don't take it for granted and think, oh, I'm just hitting a red button. No, there's a lot of small nuances that you have to experiment with, the room, the equipment, you, the player, the mindset. I know, like, playing for a recital feels completely different than recording an audition tape for graduate school or for a competition. It's like you get into that room and you have that room reserved for an hour or two, and you're spending $100, and then you're spending $50 an hour on the recording engineer if you hired one. And if you're playing with, like, say, a pianist, then her time. So it can rack up for those 2 hours. And so you feel that pressure, or you could feel that pressure, and you think, oh my gosh, I have to get it. You know, you want to do well. But what Eric is saying is, if you record at least 2 weeks back, then you don't have to have that pressure. You get to play and be musical in your music making because, you know, the recording isn't due in 7 days. It's not due tomorrow. You have 14 plus days to be with the equipment, to be in that space. And I think that's what Eric is really honing in on.
Yes.
And as a teacher and as a performer, I can relate. So when I recorded for Cluj last summer, I gave myself at least 2 weeks. Remember that? We recorded in Keller, and I recorded like 2 weeks before it was due. I recorded on a Monday and listened to it, you know, played with it, tweaked the music a little here and there in my practicing because I was like, oh, I could do this better. I could do that better. And then we recorded again on a Thursday. And then I listened back to it again. I gave myself some days off. And then I had a third day to record. So give yourself some time because you don't need to give yourself unnecessary pressure.
Yes, exactly. That's just the beauty of recording yourself from home and doing a lot of experimenting. That'll give you a lot of ease and comfort when you get to the real thing.
Mm-hmm. So the last thing that I would like to say is, as a teacher, this is advice that I would offer my students. And that is to make sure that if you are recording for a video submission, you want to make sure you look professional. Make sure you are dressed appropriately. For the ladies out there who wear dresses, make sure it's past your knees. And for gentlemen or women out there, if you want to wear a suit jacket, whatever is going to make you look professional and you are comfortable in that attire is so important. Okay, so as we wrap up, take these tips into consideration for your next flute recording submission. So before we go on to picks, if you want some more information that we have talked about in the past on this subject, go back to episode 19 and episode 63. On to picks. What are your picks for today, Eric?
Today, I pick Audio Hijack. Audio Hijack is a piece of software that you're able to record audio straight from a web browser or an application on your computer. And you can record this into an MP3 format or WAV format, or you can actually use a USB microphone and record straight into.
Cool. Thank you for that pick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my pick for today are essential oils. A lot of my listeners know that I love essential oils for their medicinal benefits. The 4 scents or 4 oils that I am picking for today are peppermint, tea tree, lavender, and rosemary. Peppermint is great to brush your teeth with. It's going to really wake you up in the morning. Very, very strong, but woo! Tea tree oil I use for skin issues. Lavender is great to help you go to sleep, and rosemary also really evens out my skin tone, and I love it. So those are my 4 picks for today, and thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time. Today's sponsor is brought to you by J&K Productions. Did you know that not only are they a production company for podcasts, but they are a recording company for musicians? Any musical recording needs that you may have, J&K Productions can fulfill that need. They have all the necessary equipment and expertise to record your next flute recording for college or graduate auditions, competitions, summer festivals, or a flute album. J&K Productions can record any setup imaginable, from solo flute, small chamber, flute and piano, and much more. Consider J&K Productions for your next recording project. Contact them at jkproductions.media. Thank you for listening to the Flute 360 podcast. For more information, please visit HeidiKBegay.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review in the iTunes store. Let's talk about flute.